So now we're getting ready to basically assemble the flywheel side of the crankcase. And I've already applied some two-stroke lube to this bearing that's been sitting there. I've got some grease applied to the seal. So now we're kind of mocking up and showing you the puller. So you need to use basically a collar. That goes on the crank first, and then, now I'm not sure if this is the original flywheel nut or not, but it is of just slightly too big a diameter that the points on the hex won't fit inside here. The other thing is, in my opinion, let me swing the camera around a little bit, is even when this is screwed on fairly tight, to me, I am not engaging 100% of the threads. So what I did was I took one of those nuts and basically rudely rounded it down to kind of a collar. And if I recall, that nut or the threads on the end of the crankshaft are 16 millimeter, and I think they're referred to as like ultra fine pitch. The pitch is 1.0 millimeter. So now what we're going to do is put that on as before, and now we're going to thread the remains of what used to be a hex nut. So now that will fit. I can thread it all the way on, even past the threads of the end of the crank, and now that fits very well inside the entire pulling surface. The other thing that we'll have to do is probably add another spacer, and here I just have an old piece of a pipe adapter that will slide over the crank and fill in the gap. Okay, so we got the puller mounted, and remember I added that big old piece of galvanized pipe adapter to fill up some of the space, and I've added Yamaha number 4 to the mating surfaces. So it's actually going very well, and just trying to make sure that as the case gets closer to the other shell, that the alignment pins are in the proper placement and guide themselves together. Okay, so I only had to put a pipe wrench on here just for a little while, long enough for the pins to align and engage. So now we're nearing the home stretch. We're still got a slight gap before that. I assume that Yamaha is going to start. There we go, start squeezing out of there. Right now, visually, it looks like I've got a bigger gap on the fan side than I do the crankshafts or the clutch side. So checking with my feeler gauges, I do have a bigger gap on this side than I do this side. So I'm going to continue trying to draw that crankshaft toward me and hopefully try to find an equidistant point. So I've got the same gap on each side of the crank web. And right now it's going to require a pipe wrench to keep things from turning. So there we had a little movement, so I'll put you on pause and do some measurements. Okay, so right now I've got about 40 thousandths on the gap on each side, so I'm calling her done as far as using the puller. Okay, so I've got the screws just set in there temporarily. I need to put the Loctite on them, but you also need to pull out the manual and find out the torquing sequence. And also there are two bolts that are longer, two screws that are longer than others. And that's the one in position 3 and 4 are longer. So now I'll pull them back out, and it's been recommended that I use Loctite number 242, which is blue medium strength. So I'll go ahead and pull those screws out, put some Loctite on them, and screw them in, and then we'll get the torque wrench out. So I'm just going to go ahead and use a hand screwdriver for now. So basically almost just barely more than finger tight is what I'm doing right now. Get that snugged up. And I'll study the diagram again and double check the kind of the star pattern, crisscross pattern needed to actually tighten this down. So apparently my new quarter-inch quarter-inch drive torque wrench does not go down to 5 foot-pounds. So we're gonna have to do this by hand, and I'm gonna use my 3/8 inch ratchet, mainly because I've got some decent, some better Phillips head tips. And you want to use the biggest tip that fits, that'll fit into the screw to prevent stripping. So I've tested this one and it seems to work best. So we're going to go ahead and start our star pattern. And here's number 1.
So then number 2 is over here. So I'm just being fairly gentle on this right now. Number 3 I think is up here. Number 4, that was one of the long ones. Number 4 is the other long one. Number 5 is up here. And number 6 is, let's see, I think it's this one. No, that was number 1. Number 6 is hiding up there.
And then number 7 at the bottom. So I'll go ahead and repeat that. And snug it up a little more, and boy, I think we're damn near done. So you can see we're turning freely. It's a little snug, and I think that's because of the seals being so fresh and providing some friction or resistance there. But so we got everything mated back together. I, as best possible, hand torque, tighten these down in a star pattern sequence. I got a nice little excessive bead of Yamaha bond all the way around the crankcase, so I think we're good there. So a little recap, the primary tool here was a crankshaft puller by Tusk, and its shortcomings for this were that I needed to create kind of a spacer for the clutch side, so I wasn't forcing against or pulling against the seal. And in addition to, I guess I could have, welded some, I guess I put it away already, welded some flat iron across here, because otherwise you need something to stop the tool from going down inside your spacer. So in the video you saw another component added to there. So basically 2 7/8 inside diameter, and then whatever, a big ass washer or plate, something on top to keep this from going inside. On the fan side, which we just finished up, the modification we needed to do was to the flywheel nut. And so my nut did not fit inside this adapter. You can find a spare nut to grind down, and basically I ground it down, basically relatively round, but pretty crudely anyway. So now that would screw all the way on the crankshaft, and also fully threaded and fit inside the collar. The thread dimensions are 16 millimeter with a 1.0 pitch, and you can get that at a local auto parts store by asking for a Dorman, D-O-R-M-A-N brand spindle nut, and I believe the part number is 615-082. There we have it. I think we needed some lacquer thinner to clean the case mating surfaces before we applied the Yamaha bond number 4 adhesive / sealant, I use thread locker, Loctite 242 thread locker on these 7 Phillips head screws, and with that, we're calling it done.